Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Reid, and welcome to our podcast for the Thesaurus, where we'll kind of just dive into both the production of the show itself, as well as kind of just talk about the topics or go on tangents that we weren't really able to go into on the show. Joining me is the co-producer of the show and kind of the fact-checker extraordinaire and editor helper, which is Devra Hock.
Hi there.
So, the first two episodes we've recorded, and as well as the intro for the YouTube page, but we've now covered basically what paleontology consists of, as well as the misconceptions that our field deals with as well. Now, I don't know how much you've had experience in the YouTube sphere or in any sort of video editing, but we have had a difficult learning curve with this.
Oh, yeah.
So, we didn't realize we, had to work on lighting and editing and audio, and it's been a big learning experience for somebody who doesn't have a background with this type of material. On top of that, we also try to research our stuff and not make it so nightmarish in terms of facts and figures.
Yeah, so it was a little bit of figuring out how to get the camera to autofocus on faces, and figured out that how light the room is impacts how much the camera's in focus and all that stuff. So it ended up being a lot more takes of especially the intro, than I think Zach really wanted or planned to. But I think it ended up working out well in the end.
Well, I'm also not a professionally trained actor or anything, so memorizing scripts and lines aren't my skill set or my forte, so trying to get words to stream in a correct and coherent form is kind of hard at times. But let's kind of deviate from the nightmares of production to more of the subject of what these videos are about, which is something that you and I are both very passionate about, which is not just the field of paleontology, but kind of expanding the generalization and knowledge of that field.
Yeah. So I think the best way to get interest in it is to help people actually understand what all the different fields are, and hopefully as we go do more podcasts and more videos, that we'll be able to have the time to really delve into what these scientists do and what the procedures are and what that entails for them, rather than just relaying the facts that we've found on the internet to all of you, because you all can find facts on the internet as well. We're also hoping to kind of give you a peek into what the science and process behind all these different things of paleo is, as well as just here's all these cool factoids.
Yeah, that was a big problem. The first episode definitely was the longest it took me to gather information, mainly because it was hard to categorize what belonged where, who got more time and attention. I tried to give everybody equal amount of not paragraph spacing, but just amount of time talked about, representative of their disciplines, their skill sets, what their focus is, and then kind of one or two fossil specimens or types of areas of study that occur in it. But one of the big issues I kept finding was even not just looking at it and doing a quick Google search, but actually diving into programs that I knew specialized in certain disciplines. None of them can concretely agree on certain things. Yes, there's vertebrate, invertebrate, paleoecology, paleobotany, but then when you get into things like Paleontology, which was one of the hardest words I've had to say multiple times in those videos. But you have that, which is an entire debate onto itself, which we mentioned in the video, between paleobotany and micropaleontology. It kind of is this weird middle crossover, but it also gets considered its own specialization. But then, aspects of it overlap into both of them. It leans into the paleobotany side, but micro uses it as well. And it just became a muddled mess of tangled disciplines, which really does, in a nutshell, kind of explain paleontology as a whole. no one is entirely isolated from each other.
No, yeah.
Everyone kind of pulls off each other and either uses elements or directly references parts of those different disciplines.
Yeah, there's a lot of research projects that are, 20 people long, or, the author list is 20 people long when it actually gets published, and there's more grad students and lab techs and everybody else working behind the scenes, but on the big cohesive paleo news that ends up getting like the headlines on Facebook and on CNN and all the other actual news sites, those big breakthroughs in paleontology, make the team that's behind that is not just like one lab working on that. You get people working across the country, across different countries, pretty much probably all of the fields that we talked about, as well as all the super specialized ones that you didn't talk about in your first video, are all included in that culmination of science and results that make up those giant breakthroughs in paleontology. It's not just one person going, I see it now. Like
right, and like I mentioned, I think at least twice, is a lot of these specific subdisciplines of paleo. I hope to do a video on each one individually and dive into them a little deeper to give them that respect of they're so intricate and they're so detailed that what we were hoping to do, at least with this first episode, wasn't a here's every detail about vertebrate paleontology, here's
right.
every aspect of invert. What we wanted was to give you kind of the generalized summary, so at an elevator pitch I can explain to you what a paleontologist is and what my specific subdiscipline is, instead of an 8-hour seminar on the different branches of invertebrate paleontology and going into that. But we also do, even at the end, mention the different sciences that even get included in the paleo, which almost no one seems to, or at least most times when you hear people talk about paleo people, all you ever hear is, we're the dinosaur guys.
Yeah. And
none of us really have any expertise outside of, well, that's a T-Rex, and that's a stegosaur, and that's a sharp tooth, and that's a littlefoot. But in reality, we're very heavily math-based. My side that I've always been more fascinated with is the bio, but I also have a heavy influence with the geology side, whereas you kind of lean more into the statistics side.
Yeah, so I started off, we both did, with a geology background and learning coming up from that way, so learning to look at the rocks and figure that out and be able to know the rock properties as well as the anatomy of fossils and skeletons and all of that stuff. And so when people do field work, it's really important to have at least one person that has that geology background, or else you end up wandering around the Badlands somewhere in Wyoming or Montana for a very long time if you can't trace beds and understand what age you're in and everything like that. So coming up from a geology side, that gives you see paleontology differently as someone who comes from a strictly bio, almost the genome editing type of paleontology, which is very high tech and very computer heavy, in a different way than what I'm doing now, which is, Zach said, is very stats heavy, but still using fossil data. I'm actually using modern data as well, but I fall into the weird mix of paleoecology and what all that entails, which we used a couple of examples in the intro video, but that's a whole area that could be expanded on its own, either podcast or video or both, with the amount of avenues that paleoecology encompasses and all that stuff. like, I don't remember which examples you talked about, but then I was like, well, yeah, but there's also this and this and this, so then we end up, like, trimming a lot of examples for actually a lot of the different paleo fields in the intro, because you'd have come up with stuff from when you were researching, and then I'd be like, well, but there's also this and this and this, and it's like, well, then...
Right, by the time we would have finished this video, it would have been a 30-minute dissertation film, and eventually that would be a fun video to dedicate to a single subject or an in-depth subject, but I don't think if we're hitting 6 or 7 different disciplines, kind of doing each one at 30 minutes, all of a sudden now we have a full Avengers Endgame theatrical release, and just that wouldn't have made much sense to do. Plus, as we kind of delved into those examples, it kind of became apparent some of them we were going a little too either deep cut, or we would overglaze them, and all of a sudden it became more of a so oversimplified, everyone would have gone, what is that? But, like, paleoecology is one that definitely is going to get its own thing eventually, because it's an intricate field, and it's something that I didn't think I was ending up in, but a lot of the stuff that fascinates me and I've looked at or I've wanted to do research in always brings me back to it, because it blends the geology with the biology, with the stats, with the both interpretation as well as just pure analysis for it. Yeah, that's something that we kind of came upon, was like, okay, we have to make it digestible for the general public. We don't want to get too inside baseball and we ostracize everyone before we even hit the ground.
Yeah, like, it's really easy for us to bounce examples and all that back off each other, and even if it's not something that we know off the top of our head, we can understand it or slightly look it up and figure out what that means. But we're trying to help everybody else, or whoever's watching or listening, understand it, so it can't be so within our own world that the examples don't even mean anything as we explain stuff.
Right, and with, like, vertebrate, invertebrate, and plants, it's easy because you can say T-Rex, you can say trilobite, you can say crinoids, you can get specifically things that are well identified in the field, but at the same time it gets very hard if then you go into biostratigraphy and biogeography, and as you go into it, I try to explain it in a very simplified version, but it gets very intricate and very in the weeds.
Yeah.
And that's why, I would almost consider what we're doing is like an intro chapter to a book where we're giving you kind of the plot, the bullet points of what we're going to talk about, as well as things that'll be involved later on, including specific animals and time periods or certain events. But I didn't want to do it all in one shot, because then if we do that in this video, it becomes very convoluted and heavy and very difficult to kind of...
Right, and you don't want the type of video that is having you lecturing at the screen hoping that people will sit there and listen. Like, you want to be more engaging and a little bit more, less lecture, here are the facts, and more interactive and engaging and all that stuff.
Right, and the facts are important, but I want it to be more of a conversation and less of a, like I said, a dissertation, which leads into the second episode that we filmed off of this, which was the misconceptions one, which you had some edits to after I had done some compiling of surveys from both our peers as well as just friends of mine and people we know in general who aren't in the field, as well as kind of going through like Reddit's Q&As and AMAs and different sites, AMAs and Q&As, which there are some overlaps, but you brought some interesting perspectives to it as well that we used. What would you say is some of the bigger weird misconceptions, or just people will say they think they know what they're talking about and they'll say it to you and then you're kind of like, let me kind of explain it a little differently.
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I personally have to deal with, and I feel just because it's the type of field that the way movies are portrayed, like the way paleontologists are portrayed in movies and in pop culture.
4 movies were actually featured in.
Well, right, but it's very much like you're digging in the dirt, you're wearing, jeans and a field shirt and a hat, and everyone's dirty, and it's just out in the sun all day, every day, finding bones, which that definitely does happen. I don't want to say that doesn't happen, because that definitely does happen. But we all have normal lives outside of being in the field. And as a younger paleontologist, someone who's still in grad school, and even the people that are 5 years older than us that are now in like the young professional early career stages, there's a distinct shift that we see at conferences of younger paleontologists not looking like they just stepped right out of the field into the conference. Especially there's a higher amount of female paleontologists that dress nicely, and I feel like that's a big misconception that I personally deal with. No one's like ever said it to my face, but I feel like it's always kind of there that like, oh, you're a paleontologist, so you must like playing in the dirt. Like, that's true, but not every female paleontologist is a tomboy who doesn't like looking nice and dressing up and stuff like that. And then like, yeah, like those exist too. There's everyone's their own individual, but there is that misconception that, oh, well, like if you're a female paleontologist, like you must not have any like nice clothes, or you don't have fashion sense or anything like that.
Well, like we've had it happen, when we worked on our undergrad research together, when we gave our poster session. You were in a dress. I mean, you had hurt your foot at the time, so you were in your little scooter.
I had my little scooter, yeah.
And then we had our colleague Corlin, who was in a dress, and then you had me in a suit and tie, which at the time everyone kind of associated me with comic book T-shirts and jeans and goofy hairstyles.
Normal clothes. I mean,
right?
Yeah.
But I also was very not an establishment kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I was very much, I don't like these kind of situations. I'd rather wear the clothes I like and speak the way I speak, and curse and be just very not abrasive, but more irreverent. Bring more of a punk rock kind of feel to it than less of a establishment kind of feel. And I remember one of our advisors kind of saw us at the poster session and had to stop and double take, and he's like, oh, I expected those two. You can wear a suit? It's like, yes, I don't wear a Canadian tuxedo every day of denim, and a bolo tie. I can actually dress up nice when I want to.
Right.
But that's something that a lot of people, I think are surprised by, that if you're not working in a museum, they expect you to just kind of look like we just walked out of a department store and have all the jeans and T-shirts that we want and covered in dirt, which, I mean, we all do field work, or some of us do. Some of us, are more lab people. But in doing so, we've had to deal with different misconceptions where, like you've mentioned, we've kind of seen a shift in the way we all look. There's a generational almost gap, you can tell, where, at these conferences, while we're not all dressed up in 3-piece suits and cocktail dresses every day.
No, but I mean, it more trends towards, like,
business
casual type of, like, if you worked in, like, a casual
words are hard, I know.
Yeah. But if you worked in an office, at just, like, normal office, that type of clothes. Like, we're not dressing up fancy, but we're also not just, walking
disheveled.
in. Yeah.
But, yeah, and that leads into one of the misconceptions we talked about, was a lot of people usually just assume we dig in the dirt and we look for bones, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people realize that we work in, like, museums, and, there's university professors, but I don't think people realize how much of us are actually involved in the museum side of things.
Yeah.
Which that's a big thing you're focused in and focused on, and I'm interested in the public outreach and education side, but we see a lot of people who get another issue. I mean, I don't think it's an issue. I think it's more just a observation is there are two types of it's like a personality kind of thing. There's the people who it's just research and lab work and work at the museum, and that's it. And then you have the people like us who can go out and do the outreach programs and do the dinosaur disaster events and talk about stuff to kids or adults or just the general public and like that interaction. And I think when people realize that we're not just hire-ons at the museum as like tour guides or something, but we're the actual scientists, they kind of get taken aback, because I think there is a disconnect with the public and not just paleo people, but a good amount of science community. There's this buffer zone of authority to authoritative, where they kind of look at us almost as like we'll look down on them if they ask any questions and poo-poo them and speak with a stereotypical British accent and condescend to them like, you speak like this? But instead, we're, most of us are just glorified fanboys and fangirls of paleo that just found out we could do it for a living.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a problem, and especially in paleontology, but I'd say in a lot of sciences, that the faculty and the professors and the professional people that are working at museums or universities or whatever now don't have either the interest or the training to do science communication well. Like in undergrad, we got taught like, here's how to write like a press release for when your paper like in Nature gets published, which like,
I mean, there is validity
that
to
is
it.
like an important skill, but I'd say that's not as an important skill as talking to people at museums or at outreach events and actually figuring out and learning how to talk about our research without them feeling like we're oversimplifying it because we think they won't understand it if we don't, or keeping it too technical and them not understanding it even if they want to. And I feel like there's starting to become a shift, especially in undergrad and grad students, of like either just doing the outreach or taking a couple of classes, like that training mentality of like, you do need to learn how to do it. But there has been that problem that it just hasn't been, it's been communicated well through museums, absolutely, but from the scientists themselves, it hasn't been as much. And I feel like people forget that like scientists are real people, like, and we all don't wear just lab coats and have big white hair. Like, I don't wear a lab coat at all. Like, I do 0 types of like lab testing, anything like that. Like, that's not the type of scientist that I am. I'm primarily my computer, and when I will be interacting with the fossils, I'll be interacting with them by taking measurements and collecting which species are occurring where, but that's all from museum collections, and then I'll bring that data back into my computer and sit on my computer some more.
Right, you data mine. You don't actually have to go to a mine to find the material.
Right, I might go to a couple of museum collections and measure stuff myself, but I'm not digging for those specimens. They've already been dug up, and I'm not doing any isotope testing on them or anything like that. So there's no reason for me to wear a lab coat. I sit in my office all day, but one of my office mates did do testing on teeth and stuff like that in her master's, and obviously when you're in a lab you follow scientific lab protocol, and I have other friends that look at microscopes a lot, but even that, like, they make the plates and everything, but they, sit on the microscope and look at stuff and don't necessarily wear the white lab coat until they're dealing with actual chemicals. So, like, the idea that all scientists are the same and that, paleontologists just either you get the idea that they are just a scientist and they're wearing the lab coats, or you get a lot of people not realizing that paleontologists are scientists because they don't think we fit into that, like, chemistry, physics lab, very small, pigeonholed of a quote-unquote traditional scientist that you'd learn about in middle school and high school.
Yeah, we do fall into the STEAM or STEM, depending on which of the acronyms you want to use. We do fall into that science field, but usually when we kind of pop up at these events, a lot of times, like, I've spoken at a STEM seminar before, and I remember I was there with an engineer, a computer scientist, and, like, 2 or 3 mathematicians, one of them who worked at, one of the universities in Illinois. They all kind of looked at me and went, okay, so what are you doing here? It's like, no, I'm part of the science side of this. They're like, well, you just do bones and dinosaurs, then I had to do a 5-minute dissertation on, fossils aren't just bones, which, I'm working on an episode purely around fossilization, because that's another misconception, is it's just old bones stuck in the ground, and we go into that explanation. But I did that, and they go, oh, so you know how chemistry and biochemistry, it's like, yes, we I reiterate this, and I almost want to trademark this, is paleontologists are the Swiss Army scientists.
Yeah.
They have so many different disciplines. What's the expression? We're masters of none, but skilled in some. I can't remember. There's going to be somebody now who's like, this idiot can't get his colloquialisms.
Idioms right, yeah.
But we don't... Yes, paleontologists do have masters and mastery of certain things, but at the same time, we do have to broaden our abilities. Yeah, we do field work. Well, a lot of that field work has to usually deal with either the bio or the geo side. But then when we get into the lab setting, then you look at things like,
chemistry,
the chemistry, but then also you bring in back in zoology and biology to look at the motor mechanics.
But a lot of that, or almost, I'd say all of locomotion and motor mechanics, is done through computer programming, and unless you're willing to constantly collaborate with somebody, if that's something that you are interested in, you need to learn how those programs work and how to work those programs with the data that you have to figure out your research question. Like, it's not like we're sitting there and being like, oh, well, we want to make this graphic or make a model run. Let's call in a computer person and just tell them what we want to do and hand it off to them. Right. A lot of people, or anyone who works with either statistics or modeling or any programming of any kind has learned that either through crash and burn failure or taking a class in it. And at some departments, it's now required either as an undergraduate or a graduate to take a legitimate computer science programming coding class, rather than it just being kind of haphazardly thrown about in labs and as part of research projects that you're constantly figuring it out or asking somebody or something like that. Like, it's becoming a required skill to do a lot of stuff in paleontology, to at least be proficient in coding for R and some other the main statistical softwares. But yeah, if you're going to do locomotion, you need to know how to run those, 3D modeling simulations. You can't... The first time, yes, you might bring in somebody that knows how to do that, but it's not feasible for somebody to do that every time they run a new model. Like,
especially since, while it's great that you can possibly call in someone like that, either you're going to have to pay a computer science person to do that for you, or in, the science community, a lot of times it's almost not a bartering, but a kind of exchange of skill sets for credit. But then that problem becomes, if there's only a finite amount of people who are good with paleo-based statistics, I should say, not statics, they're not rubbed together and shock each other, but statistics, if there's only a finite amount of professors who are students or PhDs or experts, you run the risk of overextending them, and all of a sudden they can't give you the best of their ability. So what we see a lot now, and it's a big thing I'm a very big proponent for, is this is a very important component now. So we're, like you said, you're starting to see people put it as a mandatory class. People are being asked to do it. Where, like, I remember when we were undergrads, if our professor hadn't done that, that wasn't a part of our program. It didn't. It was all geology, and even that geology, there was very limited.
We took the one class that was required was statistics for scientists and engineers.
World, it doesn't hold that same, like,
unless I'm going to actually manually calculate my principal component analysis by hand, I don't need to, know how to take the derivative of whatever it is. Like, no, the equations are out there for people to use, but it's all now within these programming packages that you call up an argument or it's all part of the coding. You yourself don't type out the long equations to calculate whatever test you're doing. It's all part of a larger package that you download or whatever. But I mean, it's good to know the basics, but I think the most mathy thing I'll do by hand is body size regression, which is just a linear, normal, basic algebra. I have the slope, I have the intercept, I need to measure this for this,
right.
And I plot it and it plots here. Like, that's going to be the most math I do, and I'm still going to type everything into Excel and have Excel calculate it for me. Like, right. I'm not doing a lot of quote unquote math. But yeah, if we hadn't had that one professor that we had that introduced R and other statistical software programs into our labs, I don't think I would have learned that stuff at all until I came to graduate school and needed to run it, and I would have been so far out of my wheelhouse. It would have been a much harder learning curve, a much steeper learning curve to figure all that programming out in a year and a half span of needing to do my research without having that basic, we've walked through this in lab before type thing. But even then, like, it was very, okay, he gave us the code and the example for that one, lab, but it doesn't translate well to other stuff. So, like, actually taking a class that you learn the language, you learn the different arguments, what everything actually means, I mean, that's a really good thing that people are learning that now, because it is such a key required skill in paleo.
Right, and I feel like one of the things that we're kind of it's one of the things that we're addressing with this show as well, not just the podcast, but the YouTube show too, is we're now addressing another aspect that I feel like has been heavily ignored by our community, which is the interweb space that we can communicate with people and discuss topics, and the impetus for this show wasn't, I just want to do YouTube show and podcast and, I have nothing else to do with my free time. But what I was noticing was when I see paleo topics come up, or if I was reading a thread on something on Reddit or anything like that, and they would bring up something paleo related and they would post videos, they either read like bad lecture videos that we used to see in like our PowerPoint slides and stuff when we were in school, Or the other people, as much as they gave some great infographics, just paint drying had about the same energy level. And what I think is there's enough space there still that there can be different viewpoints and different approaches.
Right, even with podcasts, because there are a few more paleo-centered podcasts than YouTube channels, YouTube videos. But even that, all have such a unique personality to them that, like you said, there's so much space to let no one stepping on anybody's toes, and it's not like no one's doing it the wrong way. There is no wrong way to share your ideas and everything like that. It's just a matter of if someone's coming at it and is looking more about, we're going to talk about the most popular hip thing in paleo right now, coming from it as an outsider who's not trained in paleo but is interested in paleo, and this is how we perceive paleontology and all that stuff. That's a very different and very valid viewpoint, but that's different than what we're trying to come across, which as people that have been trained in this and that live it and everything like that, of reaching out and explaining it in a fun and interesting and non-dry lecture, paint drying way.
Yeah, because the thing I've never lost, at least for me, and I've seen it with you and some of our colleagues and friends that we've either trained with or we've done work with or research with, is there is still that childlike enthusiasm some of us have for it, where it's not a, here is this, this is what it did, I'm going to ASMR this now.
Yeah.
But instead, no, like, I remember at least the last museum I worked at, we did do a big class that it was basically designed to be a compression of 2 weeks worth of field work into a 2-hour kind of simulation, where we teach them, and it was for all ages, so it was pretty much from the age of 8 or 9 till dead.
Till can you get in the box?
Right. Can you put a digging apparatus into dirt and scrape away? Good? Okay, moving on. But we taught them how to grid. We taught them why it was important to learn identification. But the whole experience, I almost treated it like an improv class, because every class was different. You know, I remember the very first class we did, it was a giant science class from this one school, but it was so massive you could see there was literally one kid who fell asleep leaning in the corner. And we it wasn't like we shamed him, but at the same time we're like, oh, we're dragging. We're this kid's bored out of his board. So we did stuff to keep his attention while the rest did their thing, but each time I interacted with kids, or families or adults, there was always a swath of different perspectives. So it kept me on my toes all the time, because it wasn't just me going, here's this thing, you listen to me, you nod, say thank you, go home.
Right.
But instead it was a conversation, and I remember one kid was like super into dinosaurs, but then it was a mammoth, Cenozoic mammal museum, so we talked about that, and then he spent the next 20 minutes asking me every chance he got how we got into the field, and how we, what do you do at school, and what do you study, and I kind of told him stuff like that, and his dad actually took down information, because he was going into high school,
right? So
he wanted to know, well, if this is what my kid wants to do,
how do I...
And it was one of those things where I'm like, I can't give you a blueprint, because we have... It's so weird. Our field is not comprised of people who spent 40-plus years digging in the fields, and then we're upgraded to lab techs, and then we're upgraded to the curators. We all come from different aspects and different backgrounds. I mean, some of the most well-known of our field didn't even finish college.
Yeah.
Or really weren't happy to be in college.
Well, also, there's not a paleontology major. So for people that want to do biology, or people that want to do chemistry, or any of the other quote-unquote more traditional sciences, that is a major in and of itself. Sometimes a whole department just for that science. And it's interesting for people that want to do paleontology as a profession. You need to kind of figure out your own path, like Zach just said, like, of which school do I go to that has, this or that program that's available to me as an undergraduate, and what experiences would I get from that school versus another school. And at the time where we went, it was pretty much the only university that offered paleontology electives, and a lot of paleontology electives to undergrads. I mean, some of them, we did have a couple of our graduate students also taking the course, but they were primarily for the undergrads, and the school offered a concentration in paleontology because of that. Whereas almost anywhere else, I would have had to wait until I got to grad school to even start taking those type of electives. And I talked to people that went to different schools that I'm working with now, and they're like, oh my god, you had taphonomy as a class in your undergrad. You had just dino paleo and vertebrate paleo as individual classes in your undergrad, and it wasn't just the dinosaurs ! For non-majors,
which we had that too.
We had that too, absolutely, but the amount and specificity and all that we got as electives was a very unique position. Mm-hmm. But like I said, there's no major in paleontology, at least not yet. So for people that want to study this, you either decide, do I like rocks, or do I like living things, and then go from there. It's kind of a build your own college degree, Right,
which also gives it a little more versatility where...
Right.
I can't speak to anyone who has degrees in other things, but I feel like once you're locked into, I want to study this, you're pretty much in that style and discipline for the rest of your academic career, unless you decide to leave and rebuild yourself up. Mm-hmm. Whereas with this, you recently dealt with that with me, where I went from a school where I had a heavy geo background, and a lot of the museums and crews and everything I've worked on, I was mainly used as the sedimentologist, stratigrapher, mm-hmm. or structural geology, as well as the paleo side. But they were using my heavy geo background as an influence. But then all the schools I was looking at and wanting to get into, I was going into their bio programs and applying to bio programs, and because I'm fascinated with the paleoecology side. Yeah. But I like looking at it with the added geo aspect to it.
So, and it's hard because it almost depends, once you get into higher, graduate level and all that stuff, it's which person you want to do research with dictates what school you apply to, not the other way around. And so if the person you want to work with is in a bio department, tough cookies, you're applying to a bio department even if you have no bio experience.
And a lot of those universities, if they know you're specifically going to that advisor, then they'll kind of organize your your education to kind of shore up those deficiencies.
Right. Once you get in, they're like, all right, your first year, here's all your bio classes.
Right. And doing so, or with you, when you got here, or when you got to your university, they shored up your statistics side and had you take your R classes and a lot of those type of programming classes, because they wanted you to not just have kind of a cursory understanding of it, but actually get a pretty good proficiency.
Well, I needed to. Right. So our department offers a paleo quantitative class, which specializes in one software programming called PAST, which I don't really use.
So you passed on it?
Yeah, I passed on the class. But that left me needing to take an art class that would give me a better foundation than what I already had, because just trying to find stuff on the internet in terms of forums and asking the postdoc that was in my office was not the best plan in the long run. And so that was something that I needed to do, and luckily, actually, the bio department offered it as one of their classes, electives that semester. But yeah, I mean, that's something that my advisors always liked, that I've gone out and found that technical knowledge by myself, but at the same time, like, but do I really have a choice to? Like, I had to use that stuff for my research, so, like, I needed to take those classes one way or the other. But yeah, what about any other misconceptions? Circle back around.
Well, the one that always makes me giggle is either the Ross from Friends or the Indiana Jones, which the Indiana Jones one I've always loved because it's kind of like going, oh, you're an electrical engineer, so you're like Bob the Builder. Like, yes, they rub shoulders and they're very much within the same kind of sphere, but they've got different applications.
Right.
Like, Indiana Jones, for those who are not
living
movie
under
fans,
a rock.
right, who haven't been alive for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
He's an archaeologist, and, well, archaeology is fascinating and amazing, and I know a lot of archaeologists, and I love giving, crap to them, because one of the things was, in one of the classes I taught, one of the opening lines is we kind of try to disseminate the difference between paleo and archaeology. And my joke is, oh, we study the really cool things, they study pottery. And there's at least two of my friends that both of them would probably have thrown a trowel at me if they could have gotten their hands on it at the time. But, paleontology, it's the easiest way to explain it, and we do that in the very first episode, is it's the study of ancient life. And when we say ancient life, we don't mean something from the Bronze Age. We mean to something that predates recorded history.
And normally not hominids, not human ancestors. There's a special commingling branch of paleoanthropology, because then you also get into the difference between anthropology and archaeology, which anthropology looks at, like, where they lived, and a little bit older, but then archaeology, like you said, is the pottery and what they left behind. But paleoanthro kind of takes that a little bit older human ancestors, but they're still mainly focused on that evolution series, where if you're not part of that group, you're just going to be a paleontologist that studies a specific species or a specific region, but you're going to be older than, 5 million years and out is kind of the starting point. Like, it has to be dead for a little bit. I mean, I know you worked on younger stuff in the Mammoth site, and La Brea tar pits in LA is another example of younger paleo stuff, but those are kind of exceptions to the rule and not the norm.
Right. We see a lot of Cenozoic mammal stuff kind of basically go up to that line where we went from being just the cave people, the very transient tribes or nomadic, I should say, tribes, to where you go to now we've gotten written histories, oral histories, traditions, cities, towns, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of where the differentiation kind of comes, and it gets a little muddied, especially now when you get to, like, the island of mammoths that were inbreeding all the way up to the very tail end. You have examples of paleontology still continuing up into, like, around the 10,000 year mark. There's some stuff that's 4,500 and change-ish. But the majority of it, you see there's a cutoff line. But again, we most of the time, outside of some of the hominids, which are the basically basal people, and I don't mean basal as in the spice, I mean basic starter point kind of thing. Right. I feel like sometimes we say the inside baseball terms, and then I'm like,
We probably should have explained that before we used it.
Right.
But we use it so often that we kind of forget how to explain it, because if you say, like, the basic form, we're not talking about, like, Pokemon evolution. Like, it doesn't, like, there's no starter pack or anything. Like,
exactly. But, like, to go off that, Indiana Jones, archaeologist, very cool. But I doubt we'll ever have a sword fight over, a saber-toothed tiger skull or a ankylosaur scoot. I'm not going to get into a fight with a Nazi over, a truck while they're transporting
I feel like
Sue.
Martian Cope were probably the closest that paleontology got to that level of excitement.
There's a whole episode, and maybe 2, that I have dedicated to that glorified pissing contest. That those two take petty to a whole... They got black belts in petty.
Yeah.
They blew up dig sites just to make sure that the other guy didn't get anything.
Yeah.
But, one, and I pointed it out in both the video of, trace fossils, there's a fossilized poo is named after one of them because the other one just wanted to give him one last, yeah, right there, buddy.
Yeah.
But... you have Indiana Jones who does archaeology. Ross Geller, who is the guy from Friends, played by David Schwimmer. I've, to be 100% honest, never seen Friends, never appealed to me. Most of my dating life in undergrad drove me insane when any girl I talked to was like, oh my god, Ross from Friends. And I'm like, nope, that's it. Check, please. Done. But as I look not only into the subject of the video, but also looking into it more, a lot of people have kind of slowly reaccepted him as a actual paleo person. Mainly studied humans and that paleoanthro kind of aspect. The one thing that I did read that made me laugh hysterically was someone pointed it out that if apparently at the start of the show he's maybe 31 years old, which... They're like, oh yeah, he's got his Ph.D., which first off, kudos to him. He somehow like fast-tracked into the Ph.D. But then he also had a professorship at the university.
And like had a hand in creating exhibits at the AMNH, so the main museum in New York, which... You have to be pretty high up the totem pole to be able to do that.
Right, to do all that by the time you're 30 and own a giant apartment in downtown New York.
I feel like there was some artistic licensing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But no, the one thing I laughed at was like someone basically put it like 22 hours of his day is basically dedicated to grant proposals and writing. They're like, he shouldn't be able to go to this Jitters coffee, but it should literally just be him every day.
Or he's just writing at the coffee shop.
Right. Yeah. Looking like one of those montages from some of those cartoons of like making a book or a manuscript where it's just him and there's just fade cuts of him just mainlining, coffee and pizza as he writes 20 grants in, one season. But yes, he is a paleontologist, but it's one of those things where I'm like, really? No one can even say Jurassic Park.
Right, Alan Grant. We'll take that, yeah.
Who's literally based on an actual paleontologist. Yeah. Not just because, it's a his mannerisms and his roughness and it's a paleontologist we both have met and we know. And it's hilarious, but... Nope, we're associated with a guy who punched Nazis for the Ark of the Covenant and David Schwimmer. Which, But, I would even take Chris Pratt at this point. Like, oh, you're Star-Lord. Yes, I am. I fly through the cosmos and I'm the Raptor Whisperer. Which, that is a thing I want to address at some point, or all the things with the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World.
Jurassic Park.
Well, not just what's wrong, but like they have a consultant, which actually goes into the misconceptions thing. Is everyone thinks we either are in the field or in a museum. We do consult on movies. We do consult on books. There are people who work in the construction industry and the highways and roads. there are consultants who get called in when you have a specimen found. You need to assess whether or not that specimen is just one isolated thing or it's this big dig site, which then will actually nullify that construction because now it's a protected site. And that's through stuff you've done some talks on, which are the, trying to think, the Antiquities Act. And you've covered stuff like that before for talks and displays at some of the museums.
Yeah, very tangentially, but yeah.
Right. But, those are things that a lot of paleontologists end up doing. Other things are they actually do go work in the fossil fuel industry as, petroleum engineers or, identifiers, because invert paleo is often used as helpful identifiers to type of oil-rich or just mineral-rich sediments that could possibly lead to those fossil fuels. Trying to think of the other misconceptions. It's been a couple days since we did that.
Since we've looked at the piece of paper. I guess one big one we kind of addressed at the beginning was that, it's not just white dudes with really long beards. That it's a fairly diverse community in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, religion, skin tone, all of that stuff. It's a pretty diverse field, and it's also a very global field. So people normally associate paleontology with primarily North America because we had the ability to find all the fossils while the U.S. was expanding westward, and it's kind of that built into the American mythos at this point a little bit. And then it started in England. Well, not started, but it got named by the well-off natural philosophers, scientists in England that...
I think it was the Royal Society or...
Right, the Royal Society still exists, but it's the gentlemen scholars of the time that had independent wealth and just could roam the countryside looking for stuff, and that was their kind of hobby, and to write these scientific papers. And so that's where a lot of the names of paleontology, of dinosaurs, some of the initial species names come out of those individuals and then got translated into schools that sponsored dig sites out here in America. But there are plenty of other places around the Earth that have long histories of paleontology. It's not just us Americans or Brits taking a field crew down to Africa to look for something and behold, we give them paleontology. There are scientists around the world that have been studying these things for a pretty long time.
Well, you see a lot of the stuff coming out of China, especially in relation to Cretaceous stuff. And then you see things in South America a lot, with the sauropod.
The big sauropods, their eggs, the long-necked guy, yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot more of that now developing, and they're getting a lot more attention. They're no longer being kind of treated as a second-rung kind of science community. We're kind of,
Right, they're not just the tour guides and the helpers that American professors employ when they go down there. They're the ones leading it and everything like that. Africa, certain places in Africa, it's always been a very, like we mentioned earlier, human-centered paleo-anthro history. It comes out of Africa for obvious reasons with the birth of humanity and all that stuff, but there's also a lot of taphonomy research. That's how the process through which things die and decompose. A lot of that's been done on the big herbivores in Africa, and a lot of more recent, there's been a lot of schools or departments opening up that are focusing in paleontology that are run by those people that live there, that are from there, that aren't just Americans or Westerners coming in and like imposing our paleontology onto them. So it's a very global field, it's a very diverse field, and I think people don't realize that because it's portrayed in history books and in science as such, like here's all these old white dudes and what they did.
And I mean, even today, there's been a massive shift, I feel like, within the last 20 years where you see a very big influx of females in the field as well. Like outside of, she gets her own day on Google and everything. I can't remember her.
Mary Anning?
Yes. Outside of her, up until recently, I can't recall, like within the 60s, 70s, 80s, really a tried and true female paleontologist being mentioned, or not getting like big attention.
They didn't get the credit.
Right. Whereas now, and we've seen these at conferences we've been to, those women are actually now getting the recognition they deserve.
Right, very delayed, yeah.
Very much delayed, but now I feel like because of that, the newer generation, your generation, my generation, are all kind of now going, okay, we're kind of just on an equal field here.
Right, well, there's a whole thing of the Bearded Lady Project, which, if you don't know what that is, look it up. We can probably make a link in the description or whatever, how that works. But it's a photo project that a large group of female paleontologists did a couple years ago, and they had it displayed at one of our annual conferences when it was released. And I think there's interviews and some video footage that goes along with it, but it was primarily, like I said, a photo project that kind of went out to highlight the inequity and discrepancy between male and female paleontologists historically. And so a bunch of more famous female paleontologists in our field today, as well as younger ones, put on fake beards and took photographs in the lab and out in the field of themselves doing paleontology, just wearing a beard to kind of bring to light the fact that we're doing the same exact thing that the male paleontologists are doing, and up until very recently have not been given the same credit. So there's been a substantial pushback and that type of thing. But again, that's probably been within the last 10 years, if that.
Well, I mean, one of the coolest things I've seen recently, and it's the whole Barbie career thing, is we recently saw, paleontologist Barbie.
Yeah.
Which, everyone's very familiar with, Barbie's a nurse, Barbie's a director, Barbie's a runway model,
Right.
Now all of a sudden...
flight attendant.
Right, now all of a sudden you're not seeing her as a quote-unquote undescript doctor, you're seeing her as like, Barbie the neurosurgeon, or,
Yeah.
You're seeing all these different things, and to see paleontology represented is a really cool aspect. Mind you, it's silly because you see like the pickaxe and the hard hat and all the khaki.
Yeah.
But if I have to eat a stereotype to see it represented in a very popular, widely known brand, and show little girls that you can do this, I'm all for it. And you're very much into the American, or the Women's Geologist Society. You do a lot of work and attend a lot of conferences and talks about women in science.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing for you that you're very passionate about. And I feel like that is something that we're seeing kind of shift in the field, because I've seen, and not, we're trying to keep it more in the fun, lighthearted aspect of this podcast. I don't kind of want to delve too deep into the darker, nitty-gritty stuff yet. But I mean, I've been in museums even recently with, the Mammoth site, where we had a woman who's, she's a Ph.D., she's a very intelligent woman, very talented woman, and a older older couple came up and was like, hey, is there any, asked one of the regular tour guides, hey, is there a paleontologist we can talk to? We have a couple questions for them. And she walks up and goes, yes, absolutely. And she goes, oh, no, honey, we'll wait till the main man shows up. And basically dismissed her, and it's like, she's one of the smartest people in this building, and you're poo-pooing her because she doesn't have the masculine features that apparently show authority, which is, it's always been baffling to people like me because, I'm dating you, and we, a lot of the colleagues of yours, or colleagues of both of us, a lot of them are strong females that we still talk to. The advisor I wanted to work under was a woman. Like, I've never had any predilections of your gender somehow makes you inferior or superior in that field. So to see the bearded ladies, which still one of the funniest memories is two collections people, they both were like, hey, can you take a picture of us with these on? And there's a viewing gallery, which certain paleontology labs, if you haven't been to them at museums, have these big viewing windows, which a lot of us like to colloquially call the fishbowl, because it does feel like we're in an aquarium or a zoo where they're like, look at them in there, they're doing the thing. Ding, ding, ding. What are you doing in there? It's like, I can't hear you through the glass. But they were like, oh, before more people come through on a tour, take a picture of us doing this. And as we're taking the picture, here comes this entire family, and you just see the looks on their faces as I'm taking the photo, because I'm on the side where I can see them, but the two who are taking this photo have no idea that there's people there. So all of a sudden they just see these, female paleontologists with color-appropriate beards for their hair color. The blonde girl had the blonde beard, and the brunette had the brunette beard. But you see these parents just going, what is going on in there? And then we come out and we talk to them, and they had a daughter, and she actually was super excited about, females. And she thought part of the requirement of being a paleontologist was you, as a girl, you get a beard. She's like, I get one? And we're like, well, you can buy one, but it's not like you get a diploma. Here's your undergraduate diploma and your beard. Have a good day. Which I don't even know what we should do for a guy. Like, here's your diploma, and
here's your better beard.
here's an actual beard, you patchy-faced looking man. Now you don't look like a guy still going through puberty in your mid-20s.
Grow the F up.
But yeah, like, I mean, some of the other misconceptions I can think of are people who think, like, oh, we've either found all the dinosaurs or they're all stacked on top of each other like a Jenga board.
Right, or like, kind of that everything's been found.
Which, even the stuff that's been found is getting recategorized all the time.
Yeah. I guess kind of going off of that, like, that's another misconception is that, and this is probably to do with the fact that museum displays are very stagnant, and that is primarily how most of the public interacts with paleontology, especially as a science, is through natural history museums. And so if they see the same display from when they were 5 to when they, graduated high school, they're going to think that the science as a whole is a very stagnant, not changing field. And that's just a limitation of a museum. But the field itself is constantly undergoing new discoveries and new ideas and shifting trees around and all of this stuff, that it's a constantly moving and fluctuating science. And not to say that that means that we're constantly wrong or that we don't know things because something else is going to come up. It's just that we have the ability now to go back and relook at older ideas and see if they still hold up or tweak newer ideas. And because of the internet, it is so easy to share information and to share science and data and ideas, that the waiting period that there used to be that you could add on to somebody's work is much shortened now. That it's almost instant of
as well as not negative scrutiny, but the scope of which you can have peer reviews and peer analysis and peer criticisms is a lot shorter now, where you can, at the click of an email, you can now look at your contemporary's work and you can objectively criticize a research method or a certain way they've structured their research. Whereas before it used to be, okay, I have to wait 6 to 8 months before my paper's published. I also have to mail this to like at least 5 contemporaries who can all double blind analyze my stuff. Then we send it back to the institute or the magazine, and then they will compile that. And then within a year and a half of me originally submitting it, eventually we get to it. Whereas now the not just the criticism and the scrutiny, but the ability to edit, change, and grow is, like you said, so much shorter.
Yeah, and I think that a lot more people are collaborating because it's so easy to do so. Like, we can share data and all of that stuff a lot easier, so collaboration's faster.
Right, you can Skype with the top paleontologist in Germany now without hesitation, whereas before you had to send a respectful letter, dear professor, I need your help, sincerely A.Ham, and send it out. But now you can,
emails are much, easier, faster way, and because of all the technology that aids in communication between paleontologists, the lag time that used to be there between new papers being published or new ideas that were built off of each other, that's much shorter now. So there's almost a sense of so many things are changing because of that, but at the same time museum displays don't change, and so there's almost a disconnect between the changing nature of the field and all that versus temporary or permanent stagnant displays that have that are showing now 20 years outdated research results.
Right, and I think that's a big thing too, is a lot of people think that paleontologists and museums themselves are these giant financial juggernauts that just can throw money wherever they see fit. But in actuality, they do have to apply for grants. They have to reply. A lot of institutes rely on the donations and the fundraising to be able to pay for those renovations. And by the time those renovations are usually finished, they're already outdated within 6 months to a year.
Right, yeah.
Which is why, and you told me about it, you went and did research in Israel recently, and I've seen it at the Field Museum, and I believe it's at AMNH and Smithsonian and some of the bigger ones, is you're starting to see the implication of a lot more digital-based displays. Now, some of them are a little more intricate and Star Trek-y, and then some are just still the touch, swipe, but what that opens up to is the data and the information can be edited at a faster rate to match the community, instead of, let me double check, okay, now we're going to get this custom placard made, then we're going to build a display for this custom placard, and by the time I get all this done, that custom placard is outdated because now the information says A now is B and B is now C.
Right. So if there's less detailed information on museum displays or signage, but there's phone apps that allow you to scan a code and it pops up more information on your screen, or it's a digital screen as opposed to a printed or a glass fronted screen, all those things are tools that museums are starting to look at in terms of being able to keep their displays more up to date, because it is much easier to go into the source file and change out a couple words rather than reprinting or rebuilding something.
Right.
But yeah, so that's one that will hopefully change, a misconception that will hopefully change as museums update themselves and remain updated, that the idea that the science doesn't change at all is a very big misconception.
Well, I think a perfect explanation for what science is it's just like the environment that it's based in is it's constantly changing. It's always evolving and growing off of what it previously was. And again, that doesn't convey that scientists don't know what they're talking about. They're building off of previously established information that is understood.
It's a ladder, but you don't know where the ladder's going, but you have to step on the rung below you to get to the next one up.
Right, exactly. And I feel like if anyone ever 100% says, oh, I 100% in science think this, or I 100% believe this is happening, I'm going to distrust that person way more than someone goes, we have like a 95 to 80% certainty that this is what's going on. All the data points to this. Okay, until new data comes along and says otherwise, I'm going to lean with that. And the guy who's like, I know for a fact dinosaurs had dragging tails, were pot-bellied, and cold-blooded. It's like, okay, you're very sure of yourself. There's 12 people who say otherwise, but your confidence is A. But, I mean, just alone in the last, 20 years, even, before we got really involved in the field, but even now, a lot of stuff that as kids we were like, oh, that's a fact, completely changed now. Like, I remember hearing about and reading about as a kid in middle school about the possibility of raptors and smaller theropods having feathers. But at the time, that was one of those, we think, maybe, it's not a big... Now, we're not even just into the raptors, it's now...
Everybody has a feather.
Right. Yeah. Feathers or feather-like filaments or, now it's like, now these ones were fluffy and these ones were thin like hairs.
And we know what color they are and,
Like, now we're seeing that not even just in the predators, now we're seeing that in the ceratopsians, which completely inverted everything on its head a couple years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get those big ones that kind of derail everybody's preconceived notions of what things should look like, but the problem is, and again, it's a information delay, is that you're still getting young kids that are interested in paleontology probably reading the same books that you had growing up, because
I don't know, I had one that talked about Noah's Ark.
Okay, well, not that one.
And dinosaurs weren't big enough to fit into the Ark.
Not that one, though probably. But the publishers can only release books so quickly, and
they have to compile information and double check their facts.
Right, and so you get these kids thinking that they know everything about dinosaurs, about paleontology, because they read the books, they've watched older documentaries, they've gone to museums, and then if something changes, they're almost like, no, that's wrong, like, because my books say otherwise.
Well, that also leads into, like, the island of expertise you've talked about with me before, where it's like, and I'll admit, I was probably that kid, in the museums going, I've memorized the layout of this, the evolving planet in the Field Museum.
Yeah.
I know everything.
I know what every word is, and I'm just gonna, it becomes a performance art for the kid and the parents, like, okay, like, why don't you tell me what you know about this fossil? And it just becomes a regurgitation of facts, which is great, and it stimulates kids' brains and it lets them learn about stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then there's almost like a barrier between what they know about this individual topic that they've absorbed all the information of, and all the other tangential ideas. They don't link, like, what they know about Triceratops to evolutionary patterns or anything like that. Like, it's just, I know these facts, I'm going to recite these facts, I'm not going to add any more information into my list of facts.
Right.
This is what I know.
And I mean, no one's demanding a 6-year-old know the intricacies of paleoecology.
No, but like the being able to apply what they know
right
to other scientific ideas is kind of like a barrier there.
Or even to a lesser extent, have them not just apply it as a, I know this information, but question it. Or, ask, how did we get to this conclusion?
Inquiry-based as opposed to fact-based, yeah.
Right, and that was like a big thing when I taught some of the classes I taught. It wasn't, I did have those kids who were like, it's this! Why? Why are you so sure about it? Well, because I know it is.
How do you know? Yeah.
Well, what helps you, why are we identifying it as this?
Yeah.
What factors? What physical traits?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a tooth, but what type of tooth? Why are you saying this tooth? What is the ridge composition? Yeah, it would have been probably easier to go, yeah, you're right, Billy, high five. But instead, we went with, let's complex think about this.
Yeah.
And again, we don't want kids writing thesis papers in the museums, but
understanding and learning about science as a process versus a compilation of facts is something that is important, and that you're seeing with some school curriculums turning to more nature of science mentality versus just the results, and some museums are starting to think about applying that as well, in terms of like, let's show more of the display be about the people behind the science, and let's show, there's always been those paleontology labs that you can see people working, but let's explain what they're doing a bit more. Let's show the process from discovery to final product. Like, let's actually break down this very complex, intricate process, instead of just relaying, this is what they found and that's all we're going to show you. I think that's a very important shift that's starting to occur, is that not necessarily let's make them question everything, but let's show them how that got there instead of just the final product.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's a big one too. What other misconceptions, or we've probably covered most of them now.
Yeah, and then, like we said, we don't want to go too deep into any of the paleo fields. Those are whole episodes, and then probably supplementary podcasts to go with those.
Oh yeah, I'm sure like whenever you hit paleontology video, it's going to be a pretty long podcast to go along with it of just constantly
we're gonna hit
like,
hardcore history territory,
just pulling up like all the examples and all that stuff, because that has a lot of, well, this person looks at this and this person looks at this, and it's all under the very large umbrella of paleoecology, and it's hard to just summarize it up with a couple of examples. Vert is obviously the biggest.
It's the one with the sexiest samples and specimens.
Well, but there's also,
and by that I mean the most appealing to the general public. I don't mean actual fetishized like Triceratops and a night teddy and stuff.
But there's so many vertebrate fossils out there
because they're the easiest to preserve too.
Yeah. So that's a huge thing that is not feasible to delve in at this point. And we've talked about how paleo uses all the other sciences, unless we wanted to go into that bit more, but I feel like we talked about that as well. And you mentioned it and everything in the actual video. I don't want to repeat everything that you said in the video here. I don't think that's the purpose of this.
No, it's more to get either tangential thoughts out or anything we wanted to say that just it didn't make sense to put into that video itself. I touched on there's probably a handful of things I missed, and I am not egotistical enough to think that I've gotten every point down and this will be the definitive. I mean, this is a side work that we're doing. You know, you have your research and your work to do. I have my own professional career. Well, you know, this is stuff that we'll be doing. And right now, probably once we finish recording this, we're going to be going on, you know, several trips and going out to conferences and stuff. So a lot of our free time is going to be eaten up by travel and, you know, all that stuff.
I know that we could pull doing a podcast there one night. That is a feasible.
Oh yeah, we'll probably do stuff like that, but I mean, like, in the meantime, like, the next couple months are probably going to be building up the next few episodes for when...
And then slowly releasing them, so this is going to be very delayed.
Right, I'm not going to be... And it's two people living in a very nice apartment, but, you know, with a very limited budget, you know. I'd love to have enough disposable income to hire 3 or 4 writers and editors and researchers to work with me, but it's one guy with a laptop and a blue Yeti mic. I mean, I'm not going to be setting the world on fire yet. But as we keep going in this, I'm hoping I'll get a little bit better skill set, and we'll slowly build up from there.
Yeah, but I mean, in the meantime, if you, I don't know what the feasibility of, like, we don't necessarily have, like, emails or whatever, but especially on the video, like the YouTube page, definitely leave comments with questions and all of that stuff. Your Twitter handle will probably be connected to all this at some point.
Yeah.
Or you'll make a new one for this.
Probably both.
Yeah.
One or the other.
I mean, stay tuned in terms of how to ask questions and get a hold of us if you so choose to. We'd always love to hear what you would want to hear more about and learn more about. Obviously, we have our own ideas about what videos will be next and what the content will be based off of our own experiences in the field, but we're making this stuff for non-paleo people and amateur paleo. We're making for everybody, but primarily for people that are not in the field, so we'd love to hear what you would be interested in learning more about and all that stuff.
And I mean, we've got a few that we've gotten put down that, like, I've got set aside as, like, I definitely want to talk about these.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have your very long list, but...
Oh yeah, and I feel like this is a type of subject in a field and all that I can go on for a very, very long time. And probably as I go on, and if I get more, not skilled, but more accustomed to this and more adept at it, I'll probably even come back to the original videos and be like, let's do this in a far better way. I mean, I'm not upset with the videos or anything so far that we've gotten the material for, or this podcast, so I think we're already off to a good start because it doesn't look like we filmed on a 2007 Razor phone, so. But it'll keep growing, and I'm, the whole time...
editing skills will get better, and yeah.
And at the same time, also, I like she said, I have no issue talking to people on a regular basis and hearing what you guys want or what your ideas for subjects are.
Yeah.
And going from there. So I guess that would seem like a good point to end this at. Yeah. Well, once again, everybody, thank you for joining us. This is the SauraPODcast. I'm Reid.
I'm Devra Hock.
And we'll see you guys next time.